Tourists were targeted because of their religion. Non-Muslims were attacked. Women and children were spared. Why? Because the terrorists wanted eyewitnesses who can speak of the brutality of these terrorists and thereby invite and instigate communal conflict in the rest of the country. The response by the majority community in India, the Hindus, they have not fallen into this trap which was laid down by the Pakistani deep state.
So what we need is a more sustained effort to dismantle the terror infrastructure in Pakistan, to break the links between the state and the non-state actors, to hit where it matters and impose a cost on Pakistan.
POK is
so
not Pakistan.
You will end up losing the sympathy of the global community.
But POK is not Pakistan.
Absolutely,
that is India.
yes, correct.
I'm
but
taking
that's
what
not
is
how
mine.
the global community looks at it.
22nd of April is not just another terrorist attack. It is a challenge to a nation which aims and dreams to be a superpower. The reply should not be that of a soft ideological nation.
That I'm taking what is mine. End of story. I move to international border. After that, there are going to be consequences for our actions.
Also, look at the
There's a lot of calculations you can do. I'll be very honest with you. There are a lot of calculations. I understand the US. I understand the economic sanctions. I'm not taking something what is not mine. I'm taking POK and then I'm saying now you tell me.
Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. 22nd of April, terrorists sponsored and trained by Pakistan carried out a dastardly attack on the innocent civilians and tourists in Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir, killing at least 28. We pay homage to the departed souls. In this podcast, let's discuss the Pahalgam attack. What has been the initial response of the government of India? What is the ideal response to these repeated misadventures by the Pakistani deep state? Is it time to reclaim Pakistan-occupied Kashmir? My dear panelists, I believe such an attack could not have been carried out without the active support and involvement of the Pakistani deep state, the ISI, the army. I believe that there are multiple objectives that Pakistani deep state wanted to achieve through this attack. Remember, this attack was perpetrated within days of the speech given by the Pakistani army chief, General Asim Munir, wherein he spoke of the two-nation theory of Jinnah, where he referred to Kashmir as its jugular vein, wherein he spoke of Kashmir being the unfinished agenda of the partition. Pakistan is in a chaos. There is unrest in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Their economy is in shambles. Since the civilian government is the weakest that Pakistan has had since its independence, the onus of fixing the economy was on the Pakistani army, thereby the army general, which he has failed to fix. Hence, increase in the prices, shortage of essential commodities, there is unrest. What I believe, there were multiple objectives that Pakistani army wanted to achieve. One was to win back this civilian population support, which has been on a decline. Why? Because the most popular leader of Pakistan, the former cricketer Imran Khan, is under arrest, and it is attributed to the Pakistani army's misadventure. The civilian population in Pakistan support Imran Khan. In fact, the diaspora also are in favor of Pakistani former cricketer. So to win back the support of the Pakistani civilian population, Pakistani army planned this attack. Why? Because when such an attack is carried out, it will invite Indian retaliation. Indian retaliation will galvanize the civilian support to the Pakistani army, which is on a decline. That's number one. Number two, look at the nature of this attack. Tourists were targeted because of their religion. Non-Muslims were attacked. Women and children were spared. Why? Because the terrorists wanted eyewitnesses who can speak of the brutality of these terrorists and thereby invite and instigate communal conflict in the rest of the country. And this destabilization which Pakistani army wanted to achieve through this attack, it would have been a Schadenfreude movement for the Pakistani army. Let me bring in Chetan sir to this discussion. There was something different about this attack. It was not an attack on Indian army or the security forces. it was an attack on the civilians. How do you view this attack and compare it with the earlier attacks perpetrated by the Pakistani deep state? For the first time ever in the history of Unacademy, Unacademy Plus subscription for 12 months is available at 17,999. I'm told this subscription fee is valid till the 30th of April 2025. If you wish to prepare with us for CSE 2026 or beyond, the link is provided in the video description. Subscribe now and together, let's crack it.
If you look at terrorism, particularly Pakistan-sponsored terrorism against India, the objective has always been to grab maximum attention, grab eyeballs, ensure that the media focuses on the incident, ensure that the government reacts in a disproportionate manner. And this can be done only when you outrage the masses, trigger public sentiment. And that is very evident in the very nature of this attack, the modus operandi which was followed by the terrorists. Look at the way in which they brutally slaughtered civilians, left behind eyewitnesses so that the brutality can be reported outside. And look at how victims were profiled on the basis of their religion. This was clearly designed to outrage the Indian population and play with the social divisions of India. And also, if you look at the recent terror attacks that Pakistan has been carrying out, especially in the last decade, it has primarily targeted military sites from Gurdaspur to Pathankot to Uri to Pulwama. This is the biggest attack on civilian population after 26/11. So we are seeing a clear change in Pakistan's strategy, a clear shift which is happening. And I think that speaks volumes about Pakistan's involvement in this incident as well.
And the timing as well, when US Vice President was on a visit to India, Prime Minister Modi was on an important visit to Saudi Arabia, the timing also makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And there is a pattern to this. This is not the first time where Pakistan has timed an attack during high-profile visits to India. If you remember in 2000,
Bill Clinton was on a visit to India.
And there was a massive terror attack targeting the Sikh community.
At Chatti Singhpura in Baramulla.
Exactly. In 2002 as well, senior State Department officials were in India to discuss about Kashmir and discuss about key bilateral issues between India and Pakistan, as US was playing the role of sort of a mediator between the two sides. Even in 2002, we saw a similar attack, which was timed to coincide with the visit of the State Department officials.
Mukesh sir, when you read about this attack, what was your initial response?
So, to summarize it, first of all, it is very gruesome in the very nature of it, and the kind of profiling that sir has talked about. This is something which is new in terms of, in the recent past, if you take a look at the various different types of expectation that you have from the Pakistani deep state, you were in a thought process that maybe normalcy has returned to the valley. Maybe because of the picture painted, maybe because we were lulled into a kind of a complacency. So it was a kind of a rude shock and a rude awakening at the same time. But at the same time, we also have to keep in mind, this goes along with the decade-old policy of Pakistan to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. So it fits the entire pattern. And if again you take a look at the cyclical nature of these attacks, why do these kind of attacks keep on happening? That is a kind of a pertinent question that comes to your mind, that why after Pulwama, why this? Or why was there a 26/11? So again, something that you started the entire argument with, that whenever the Pakistani deep state or Pakistani army experiences a slightest dip in popularity level, they kind of demonstrate and they kind of carry out these kind of attacks so as to ensure that they keep themselves relevant. We have to keep something in mind, that despite all the economic hardships that you talk about, despite all the bailouts that the IMF gives and the Chinese give to the Pakistanis, the defense spending of Pakistan is still humongous as compared to the proportion of the GDP. They are still spending close to around $10 billion, which they simply cannot afford. That is more than almost or comparable to the entire forex reserve that they have. Now, to keep themselves relevant and to ensure that they are the political masters and they are the ones who dictate what the future policy of Pakistan is going to be. So there it fit into the larger jigsaw. But then again, this was quite a surprising move at this point of time, given the kind of unpopularity that Pakistan as a region, as a nation state faces, and a kind of a diplomatic isolation that it is heading into. It cannot, simply cannot afford these kind of, again, public images being tarnished. And in this case of an attack, we have also seen that long time allies of Pakistan, where Pakistan always thought that the West Asian nations, the Middle Eastern nations, they will blindly support Pakistani cause. Now there Pakistan basically finds itself isolated and alone. So I think they have got this wrong.
Sham sir, 26/11 attack was carried out attacking the financial capital of India, Mumbai. Do you think this attack was timed at the peak tourist season in Jammu and Kashmir so as to cripple the tourism economy and industry in Jammu and Kashmir?
The answer to the question is absolutely yes. The state of Jammu and Kashmir generates around 7 to 8% of the total revenues through tourist arrivals. And this is the best time to visit Jammu and Kashmir. By having a terrorist attack, there will be a ripple effect. Not only the domestic tourist, but also the foreign tourists have cancelled their visit to the state. And this has basically disrupted the whole economic activity. And when you talk about returning to normalcy for a particular state, one of the features is how much is the economic activity. By having a terrorist attack, the whole economic activity of the state has been disrupted now. So yes, this is an attack which will have a larger economic impact as well.
Abhishek sir, when you read about such an attack of dastardly nature, it is obvious that emotions will run high. In such a scenario, what do you think is the ideal response to such an attack?
Sir, I would firstly say that it is unprecedented. After 26/11, as sir said, that there was a specific attack on armed forces. However, this time they have the courage and again have garnered the guts to attack civilians. That too in a mini Switzerland, as it is called. Pahalgam is a very important sector in Kashmir. Now, when we talk about an emotional response, it is outrage. And I would say anything which we've done till this point hasn't been enough and will not be enough. And we have to go one step further. Because if surgical strikes or targeted strikes was the answer, this would not be happening, we would not be sitting here. So as an Indian, I'm outraged. As an Indian, I'm angered, and maybe our response should not be impulsive, it should be calibrated, but it should be in the same proportion. It does not mean that we target civilians in Pakistan, but the perpetrators of this act need to be given a lesson that they don't try to do this again. It may be that I'm speaking in emotion, but maybe all of us as of right now don't need this logical, structured way of understanding this, but a response which is befitting. The word is, it should justify and it should be befitting for an Indian to feel, yes, I think what we've done is correct and befitting reply to such a gruesome act.
Chetan sir, the initial response by the government of India has been the normal ones, for example, reducing the diplomatic presence in Pakistan, but something unprecedented as well, keeping Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. Right. Remember, this is the treaty which survived even during the time of 1971 war, the 1999 Kargil, even the 26/11 attack. What is the significance of this decision taken by the government of India?
As you correctly pointed out, this is a very big milestone as far as India-Pakistan relations is concerned. I think this was an inflection point where India had to take a stand, and this is something we've discussed many times as well in the previous incidents when Uri or Pulwama attacks happened. There has been a lot of debate that whether should India quit the Indus Water Treaty. But keeping the larger consequences in mind, India stayed committed to it. It's not that India benefits from the treaty, it's Pakistan which largely stands to benefit. So now the implication would be quite serious. At least the short-term implications would be that India would stop sharing the hydrological data. And this would essentially affect Pakistan's policy making with regard to its agriculture, irrigation. Second, India would not hold the Indus Water Commissioners meeting under the Permanent Indus Commission. And third, it would give India the freedom going forward to set up projects on the western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum and Chenab, possibly storing water and diverting the water if necessary, which could stop the flow of water into Pakistan as well. So that would have serious implications for Pakistan down the line. Because don't forget, nearly, if I'm not wrong, 80% of Pakistan's irrigation is dependent on the Indus waters. And that tells you everything about Pakistan's dependency on these waters.
The purpose of Pakistani deep state was not just to revive the declining popularity of the Pakistani army, but as we discussed, was also to stoke communal tensions in India. Two things have happened. One, the response by the majority community in India, the Hindus. They have not fallen into this trap which was laid down by the Pakistani deep state. So the kind of communal polarization that they wished would happen because of this attack, that has not taken place. Despite what may be happening on the social media, on ground, there has been no communal tension between India, between the Hindus and the Muslims.
True.
That's number one. Second, something unprecedented has happened. Normally, you would see that the local population of Kashmir, particularly the valley, would support the Pakistani deep state. This has not happened in this case. For the first time, as far as I can remember, a bandh has been organized by the Kashmir-based political parties, supported even by the moderate faction of Hurriyat Conference, Mirwais Umar Farooq, supported by the Kashmiri industrialists as well. They have organized this bandh, and in one unison, they have spoken against this dastardly attack. A special session of Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly was conducted in which all the MLAs, cutting across party lines, condemned this attack and called for peace. So the trap which Pakistani deep state wanted to lay the Indian state and the population and the wise Hindu population, they have not fallen into this trap. Would I be correct in this assessment?
Absolutely, yes. If you take a look at all the previous attempts that the Pakistani deep state has made, now they also consider India a weak state. Why a weak state? Not in terms of the brute strength, but in terms of the various different kind of divides that we have in our society that can be exploited. Now, that is where their calculation again boomeranged because of the kind of resilience that as a population we have shown. Now, this was also their calculation. We have to keep in mind that was also the calculation during the Mumbai attacks. At that point of time also, when they went ahead with the attack, the thinking was that there would be some amount of anger against the local establishment and some amount of, again, internationalization of the Kashmir issue. Neither of those were achieved. At this point of time also, the same objectives were there. And you have to keep one thing in mind, the eyewitnesses who were basically left to mourn for the dead. Now, those eyewitnesses were not told to go and report it back to army. They were said categorically, go and tell Modi. Now, this is where they are trying to paint the entire nation in a particular canvas and a canvas filled with divides, thankfully. Now, there are certain sporadic events here or there, and all the state governments thankfully have brought them under control. But that is where thankfully the nation has spoken in unison, and that is where overall the sentiment that you talk about, that is in terms of some amount of retaliation, and so that they are taught a kind of a lesson. I would also add another thing to when you talk about this kind of an attack, and you asked about what was the first thing that came to mind. There was another kind of an incident which and whose memories were triggered when you hear about this attack, and that was the kidnapping of the foreign tourists from the same very location in Pahalgam. So this is one of those areas where the Pakistani deep state has been very active. They have been moving through and back from this region owing to the terrain, owing to the geography. They know that they can always have a kind of a say in this particular area. And that is where, again, their calculation backfired, because when you talk about TRF, who initially claimed the responsibility for the attack, the entire assumption was that they will have a large-scale support in the valley. But as you correctly pointed out, it almost completely backfired. They have actually no support in the valley. And that is where
Which may also mark the beginning of an end of terrorism in the valley. Because to carry out such attacks, you need local support in the form of overground workers, in the form of providing housing facilities, sleeper cells. And with this message, which the local politicians are trying to drive home in involvement of the civilian population, that local support to terrorism would be on a wane. And this might be a beautiful event in the history of the end to terrorism.
But there is precedence to this. Other than the rhetoric of the politicians this time, be it any war, be it 47, be it 65, be it 71, or any other attempt where the Pakistani forces have entered as Pathans, have entered through these passes and tried to garner support within the valley against the Indian state. Everywhere we have precedents saying that the people of the valley, people of Kashmir, have always stood by the authorities. Yes, there are, you can say, anti-social elements, there is friction within the society, but the unprecedented nature in the politics of it rather than the people. People have always stood by. Look at the response of the locals, what happened on the ground. They tried to calm everybody down. And as you said, Kashmir has spoken again at an international level that we do not have a problem with the current arrangement, and the Pakistanis are trying to push an agenda which is very old. It's archaic in that regard. So I would say that the support of the locals is, we have precedence for that.
And
something which is interesting is politically we are now united, be it the opposition, be it the Jammu
You're
and Kashmir
right,
government.
because the Kargil war, the incursion, it was first reported by a localite to the Pakistani army. In fact, during 1947 war as well, they were the localites who played a very important role in thwarting this Pakistani aggression. And let's also not forget, you can't win a war against terror without intelligence. And that intelligence comes from the localites.
Yeah. And in this case as well, we have heard heroic stories
Yes.
of local pony riders saving the victims, helping them out.
So let's say that these terrorists are Pakistanis, and the people of Kashmir have always made this distinction that they never have embodied the interest of a Jammu and Kashmir local. Let's be very clear.
The convening of the legislature and the kind of messaging that was delivered by people and members across political lines, all of them showed solidarity and unison in what they want. They basically even went ahead to say that this is not how we want to gain tourists. This is not how we can have any demands. This is not what Kashmiriyat is. So that entire session was as moving as it can be, and that is where I do believe that it is one of those landmarks and it is one of those momentous times in history where we can see that coming together of the population to defeat the larger agenda of terrorism, as Chetan sir said.
And this was also a time when Kashmiris mourned together with the rest of India, which is, I think, for the first time.
Offering of free cab rides, so they basically went out of the way, not only to make the people comfortable, but to try to assuage their pain as much as possible. Obviously, nobody can basically compensate you for a lost one. Nobody can provide you with the courage for that. But at the same time, the solidarity which was offered by the local population, I think that is something
And
which
the
was
lack of
unparalleled.
politics around this issue is again unprecedented and encouraging. At least the way, the type of behavior we have in the parliament and the way we get polarized within the parliament itself, the united front which Indian politics and state politics has shown over this is very encouraging, shows that our democracy is very mature. That in these moments of, you can say, weakness and strength at the same point of time, we are standing together. The deep state politics was not just about communal, it was very simply about destabilizing the political rhetoric also. We could have easily had an opposition which would say that no, we have to do this and that. The unisons, the united front here is something which has taken Pakistan by surprise. And maybe that is where we have turned a page in the politics of Kashmir and in the politics of Jammu and Kashmir and with Pakistan, that we can at least stand together.
There is a lot of noise on social media, a lot of noise blazing out of the 9 p.m. studios as well. But here, let's be rational. Chetan sir, after the Uri attack, we carried out surgical strikes. And the intention was to prevent and deter future commission of such acts by the Pakistani deep state, which did not happen. And that's how we saw the Pulwama attack of 2019. And the response to that was, for the first time since 1971, we crossed the airspace of Pakistan and we carried out another surgical attack. Right now, in response to this dastardly attack, what are the options available with India?
India has to consider a well-calibrated approach to the retaliation. Because you mentioned about the surgical strikes post-Uri, Balakot airstrikes. Those were one-off responses from the Indian state. To think that alone would act as a deterrent and prevent any future terror attack, I think it's a
wishful thinking.
Wishful thinking, exactly. So what we need is a more sustained effort to dismantle the terror infrastructure in Pakistan, to break the links between the state and the non-state actors, to hit where it matters and impose a cost on Pakistan. So for this,
Which
India,
would be?
Exactly, I was coming to that. India has plenty of options in front of it. One, of course, would be the course of diplomatic action that we can take, which we have already done through certain steps. Going forward, we can use platforms like United Nations, the UN 1267 Sanctions Committee, ensure that Pakistan-based terrorists are sanctioned through the UN, use platforms like FATF.
The sanctioning of Masood Azhar, Hafiz Saeed, it had no impact
It did
whatsoever.
cripple the ability of Lashkar and Jaish to organize attacks, because sanctions through
But
UN...
unless and until you target ISI, the Pakistani army,
I'll come to the hard approach. I
Right.
was just talking about the diplomatic approach first. and then we can talk about the kinetic action and the covert action which is available to the Indian state. So we can use FATF platform as well to target terror financing in particular, and we can also ensure we can rally support from global capitals, bring in international pressure and isolate Pakistan, which we have done quite effectively. Post Uri, we adopted SARC minus Pakistan strategy. We revived BIMSTEC and sidelined SARC, and Pakistan has been sidelined for the last decade, at least within South Asia. Today, United States, Europe, who have been standing with Pakistan for decades, have largely stood with India and abandoned Pakistan altogether. The de-hyphenation they have done, they no longer look at Kashmir through the India-Pakistan prism, and they have largely let India handle it bilaterally. So those diplomatic efforts do have an impact. But other than that, this attack deserves, as Abhishek sir correctly pointed out, it deserves a clear-cut response from the Indian state using its hard military power. We have to hit back at legitimate terror and military targets. We have to ensure that it's proportionate, not target civilians. Of course, India would not do that, or else we would have seen a very impulsive response by now. So clearly it has to be well calibrated. We have to ensure that maybe there could be a naval blockade of sorts to punish the Pakistani economy. And we have heard reports of INS Vikrant leaving base from Karwar. And there has been intense speculation that possibly India is thinking of a naval blockade in the Arabian Sea, which could have a crippling effect on the Pakistani economy. And also, let's understand in today's times, war is not just fought in a traditional domain. It's not just fought in land or in the sea or in the air. There are many other
information warfare.
Information warfare, cyber warfare, crippling Pakistan's critical information infrastructure, targeting Pakistan's power grids, which could in turn impact its economy, along with the hard military options where we can strike the terror targets, be it let's say Lashkar headquarters in Muridke, or the Jaish headquarters in Bahawalpur, or the terror launch pads across the LOC in POK. So there are many targets available to the Indian state, and that's something which should be considered. And along with that, the last point, the covert action. And this has to be sustained again. Maybe we should play with Pakistan's internal sensitivities, be it the Baloch insurgency we have seen, the Sindhi nationalist movements which are there. India has maintained contacts with these groups. There might be a right time where India should get involved, and you need to meet eye for an eye.
You would also remember the infamous Sharmal Shake summit in 2009, where in the joint statement of India and Pakistan, the reference to Balochistan was given, right, which backfired.
Backfired on India. But the very essence of a covert operation is that it gives you the element of plausible deniability. Sharmal Shake was a diplomatic blunder, yes, but India getting involved in Pakistan's internal fault lines would help weaken the deep state's hold on Pakistan's state.
Because should we revisit the no first use nuclear doctrine?
That is something India should consider, given that Pakistan has tactical battlefield nukes. Let's say India uses the military option, some sort of military strikes are carried out, maybe an airstrike or a missile strike, or even surgical operations using special forces. Pakistan will treat this as an act of war. Pakistan will retaliate. So there is something called the escalation ladder, where you engage in a tit for tat military retaliation against each other. So once India retaliates, Pakistan is expected to retaliate. So each side taking one step after the other, where do we reach? There is a threshold eventually. Both sides have nuclear weapons. So at what point do the nuclear weapons come into play? Especially given that Pakistan has tactical nukes in hand. So this is where I think we should revisit the nuclear doctrine as well. Maybe ensure that we clearly define the no first use policy, because there is a possibility Pakistan might drop a tactical nuke on India's forces, maybe on India's aircraft carrier, or maybe let's say India plans a limited ground incursion and Pakistan decides to drop a nuke on Indian troops. Do we consider that as a first strike? So that lacuna is present in our nuclear doctrine. I think we need to revisit that, and this is the right time to do that.
Could you explain to the audience what is this no first use policy?
India's no first use clearly states that India would not be the first state to launch a nuclear attack. We will not attack a state without nuclear weapons at any cost. And if at all we are attacked by a nuclear state with nuclear arsenal, India will retaliate with a devastating second strike. And for that, we have established a minimum credible deterrence. India has a nuclear triad today, which means we can deliver nuclear arsenal through land, through air, through underwater methods as well, using the nuclear powered submarines. So it is this deterrence that India has built, which is focused both on China and Pakistan. But the lacuna for us is that Pakistan has kept it very ambiguous. It doesn't have a clear command and control structure. We are not sure whether it's a civilian government which is in control of the nuclear decisions. If at all Pakistan goes to a nuclear war, There is no clarity whether it would come from the Pakistani civilian government or the deep state.
But I think we have a clarity when Pakistani army runs the state. It is the Pakistani army which will have the last word.
What if battlefield commanders have been given the decision-making authority on tactical battlefield nukes? What if it doesn't come from the army chief? Or what if there are radical force elements within the forces who go rogue?
So basically you are dealing with a rogue state.
So,
So shouldn't the response then also be slightly different?
it has to
You're
be
not
asymmetric.
dealing with just any other country.
Exactly. Our response has to be more asymmetric. Instead of just considering traditional military options, there has to be a lot of hybrid options which has to be built in.
Sir, rather I'll towards his nuanced approach, I'll be very blunt in saying one thing, that Pakistan is an irrational state. Any act from India will be an act of war, and this time I think we will not have covert or surgical strikes, because if surgical strikes were enough, we would not be sitting here. The idea is that something we will do, it will be of such magnitude that it will be an act of war. So rather than waiting for the Pakistanis to declare war, I'll be very blunt in saying that this is an opportunity. I may sound irrational, but it is an irrational state which we are dealing with. So therefore, we should use this opportunity to have an attack which is of a magnitude which explains this whole event.
So you want an all-out war with Pakistan.
Yes. We should out of the picture where they are not understanding LOC, they don't recognize LOC now. We should just move to the international border, hold on to Haji Pir Pass, Uri Pass, Kargil Pass, what we did in 1965-66. Tashkent was an opportunity where we had to give up because of the USSR pressure and because of the international situation. We are not, as of right now, food deprived or energy deprived. We have that type of diplomatic prowess as of right now that we can hold on to such a decision. We can easily quote technicalities in the Shimla agreement. Let's at least use this opportunity to have the upper hand. India in first use policy or whatever it may be, Pakistan will have an irrational response because they're not answering just to the people of Pakistan. They have to answer to their own, what we call as masters who have an agenda. So we can have as many nuanced agreements and arguments coming through here. I'll be the one who will be the blunt one who will say this is an opportunity. Let us draw a line somewhere. 26/11 should have had such a response. We would not have been talking about Uri and Pulwama. Today we are sitting at Pahalgam incident. We're talking about this. Again, after 5 years, we will have such an incident. Civilians, if targeted, is total war. This is the difference between 100 years war between England and France and the difference between a First World War and a Second World War. Killing a civilian equals to killing a military personnel. Once this principle comes through, we know that Pakistan will not have nuance. We know that Pakistan will not give you a rational or a very, and be it, sir, I agree with you that we have diplomatically isolated them. That did not work. We pushed them into the FATF, did not work. They were looking for loans. IMF was not ready to give that. They got it. China is an actor which we're not talking about as of right now, which will complicate this whole story. We have done surgical strike. We've entered into their airspace, but we still sit here, sir. Where do we draw the line?
So an all-out war with Pakistan,
we will
reclaiming Jammu and
we will
Pakistan
be at war
occupied
either
Kashmir.
way, sir. We will be at war either way. Let's at least take the first edge and at least hold on to the very tactical passes which are used for infiltration. We are sitting here because Uri, Kargil, Haji Pir Pass, all these passes are open and they can enter. Let's at least hold on to that.
Mukesh sir, what should be the ideal response? For the first time ever in the history of Unacademy, Unacademy Plus subscription for 12 months is available at 17,999. I'm told this subscription fee is valid till the 30th of April 2025. If you wish to prepare with us for CSE 2026 or beyond, the link is provided in the video description. Subscribe now and together, let's crack it.
So here, first of all, I would like to make a comment on what Chetan sir said about revisiting India's no first use policy. I'm not of a particular opinion that we should revisit it, and I have certain reasons for that. First of all, when a large country like India oftentimes gets painted with the likes of other subcontinental nations like Pakistan, this is one iota of semblance and a kind of a rationale which comes through, which puts us in a very good light. And we have to understand that successive defense ministers have made it very clear that even if a tactical nuke is used against any Indian individual, personnel, troop, anywhere, that will be considered as an attack on India. That will be considered as a first strike. And once that happens, Now, there are murmurs going on around a tactical nuke being used against INS Vikrant. Now, an aircraft carrier, most of the countries, they consider that as their own territory. So, if there is an attack on INS Vikrant, that would be always considered to be one of the massive first strikes, and India reserves all the rights to respond. And you have to understand one thing. Why is it that Pakistan is responding to this idea of bleeding India through 1,000 cuts? Because Pakistan understands it very easily and clearly that it cannot defeat India in the case of conventional warfare. It simply doesn't have the wherewithal. We are a stronger state, we are more resilient state in the sense that we can have a much greater sustenance of this attack and this war. And they have tried it multiple times. They have tried going at war with us, conventional war, 4 times. The last one was under that nuclear umbrella, the threat of the nuclear war. But they went and they suffered defeat. So our conventional warfare tactic is strong enough. We should rely on that. We should rely on our operational resilience, and we have been honing that upon multiple decades now. We have had a history through Cold Star Doctrine and so on. So we have war gamed this entire situation. Let us rely on the troops. Let us give full confidence to the troops. And that is where I feel that if we start diluting the no first use policy, our credibility might take a hit. Let them resort to what they can, and we have the wherewithal to basically give back what they want. Now here, when Abhishek sir talks about the fact that we should simply declare an all-out war, you see, we are already in a state of war. It is, if we call this as a state of peace, I think that will be a misnomer. That will be us fooling ourselves. We are already in a state of war. Now, how do you want to play out this war? Do you want what the playbook of Pakistani generals now, what they dictate? Because think about it, they would have also thought about it that if we carry out an attack, Indian response will be imminent. And that is where all their ministers are talking
And
about.
different from Balakot and Uri.
Yes, because they were always confident, and they have been confident, that whatever response from India will be, it will be restricted across the region of LOC. What the surgical strikes after Uri, the air strikes after Balakot, all of that indicated that our response will be within certain range of the LOC, and that is something they can absorb without taking much of a hit. Here what I feel is that our response can be more holistic in the sense, when we talk about these terror launch pads, these are the final nodes from where the terrorists, they eventually infiltrate into India. But their supporting base is basically a military installment, a military installation. Now, those military installations, they have to be softened. And when I say softened, pulverized to the ground with consistent attacks. Let them not have time to build that up. And we have enough wherewithal to do that. And we can do that without even crossing the LOC or international border for that matter. Let's weaken the portion of the Pakistani state which is enforcing and reinforcing all of that without damaging the civilian population as much as possible. The entire concept that the Pakistani civilian population should be not damaged, I agree to that. They should not be harmed. After all, it is a war against the deep state. But till when? Do we recalibrate all our measures for decades now, thinking about something while our civilian population keeps on
Why
dying?
haven't we been able to implement these ideas till now?
There have been multiple reasons also about the stage that we have been as a nation. We have basically, if we take a look at it today, we are much more powerful in terms of our reserves. If you take a look at previous...
Or is it because of the international pressure where the world community would not want two countries with nuclear weapons engage in such a warfare?
That is very true. You had Senior Secretary of State for US government have always said that South Asia is the nuclear flashpoint. And if there is going to be a nuclear holocaust, it might very well start from South Asia. So there has been that global international pressure. And right now we are in that sweet spot where we enjoy a kind of diplomatic presence and a diplomatic soft stance from almost all the global powers. So that is some of the achievement that successive governments and their policies have achieved.
And would this be an opportunity? Because if I can recall, during the time of Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell. There used to be a lot of interference by United States between India and Pakistan. Now that United States is slightly and slowly withdrawing from the global world map, it wants to focus on its economy. This is the right time for India to go on these adventures and pulverize, as you say, the terror launch pads.
It is, but at the same time, I would also say that when you're talking about the times of Condoleezza Rice, in fact, if you go back further, Indian state, and in terms of the power of the Indian state, in terms of the defense equipments that we have, and here we have to consider also our war reserves. There have been many previous instances where we wanted to go to war, but we did not even have enough reserves. Maybe our doctrine was not sharp enough. For example, after the Parliament attack, now that was as greater and deeper attack as it could have been. Now, India was very clear that we will go all out. We basically waged Operation Parakram. That was the full-scale deployment of Indian troops. But during that deployment itself, we lost more than 100 troops. So that told us that there were weaknesses, and we have been honing that, we have been wargaming that over decades. And now I think so that we are in a position where we can give a befitting reply. And whatever the global community will have a reaction. Maybe we are threatened with something, we are threatened with action, a coercive sanction by maybe some of the countries. But India has got the wherewithal now to withstand that. And India is a voice.
But why sanctions? This is an act in self-defense.
Yes. We are living in
And
the era of war.
Don't forget how the global narrative has shifted as well.
Yes.
If you look at West Asian powers, Saudi Arabia, UAE, they have consistently backed Pakistan until 2008, 2009. But post 2611, there was a turning point. The US brought pressure on these West Asian powers as well. Plus, India was a rising economy. The Saudi and UAE billionaires, they saw India as a great investment destination. So they have strategically shifted their policy towards India. For example, on Kashmir, be it on terrorism, they have clearly shown an inclination to back India. We saw this during Uri and Pulwama attacks. When India retaliated with Balakot airstrikes, both Saudi and UAE leaders were openly in support of India, saying India has a right to defend itself. And they called out these attacks as terrorist attacks. And
this time also, even the statement coming from Taliban,
right,
it is on Indian side.
Exactly. So the global narrative is largely in India's favor. So we, as Mukesh sir pointed out, we do have the war reserves, we do have the global narrative in our favor, and we do have a legitimate point where we can respond on.
So
And isn't this the right time as well, considering the friction between Pakistani state and Taliban, considering the problems that Pakistan is facing within its depleting reserves and the economy? Maybe this is the right time?
Absolutely. And don't forget, India also has reached out to Taliban. We have been having high-level interactions with Taliban of late. And Taliban may not host the anti-India terror groups as it used to before.
So this adds to what I am trying to say, sir. I didn't say that we have to go to war. This time we have an opportunity.
But you did say that we should go out.
Because I said that either way our action is going to lead to war. So the first act should
But ours is not an action, it's a reaction.
What, sir?
So what I would basically recommend is, already the economy in the Pakistan nation is unstable. In addition to military operations, my argument is we should cripple it a bit more. What do I mean by that? Essentially, we have already stopped the direct trade that is happening between India and Pakistan. Why not altogether stop whatever exports we are doing to Pakistan indirectly? Many of our exports go to, let's say, the Middle Eastern countries, Singapore,
Pharmaceuticals.
yes, fertilizer, pharmaceutical, etc., which are rerouted again to Pakistan. And this is not a small amount. The government estimates say it is somewhere to the tune of around $10 billion. So if you cut off this particular export altogether, either direct or indirect, the economy which is already facing troubles in terms of inflation, in terms of loss of employment, etc., the economy will be crippled. So on addition to the military operations, if you can cripple the whole economy, I feel that would be a better strategy rather than going basically on an all-out war.
Which will also create a social unrest in Pakistan. The civilian population will be up in arms against the Pakistani deep state, which is the army. Their credibility would further take a hit. So it's a win-win situation.
Yes,
But
and
I would argue
you would be
rather-
basically protecting our image in the international market also.
So
that
India's
is
response.
There's a trifecta right now. Diplomatically, they're isolated by their old traditional allies. Economy is crippled, and there has been an act from Pakistan, which is where we draw the line. Now, if we use a surgical strikes and maybe targeted strikes is something which Pakistan can predict as of right now. But moving and taking, at least shifting the LOC towards the international border and a deep attack, because what Mukesh is saying that we should have targeted strikes, where therein comes intelligence. Do we really know that those are the launch pads from where things are happening? We don't have
Absolutely.
So military installation
No,
as it is an act of war.
Post
So
Uri-
why not first move to the international border? Then from there we can see. This is where, sir, any form of response is going to be escalated by Pakistan. Why not have a Russia type strategy here? It may not be good. Why not have a Russia type strategy? Russia
So
first
I
acted
have a
and then was able to manage the whole international discourse
I have
around
a
it.
counterpoint to this. When I say India's response has to be targeted, well calibrated, we are not talking about a one-off strike like the Balakot airstrike. Balakot airstrike was not a solid, persistent,
But then
sustained.
China and Pakistan are not going
And-
to sit around and wait for us to then hit every target with BrahMos missiles.
No. And a multi-front
We are
war.
forgetting China factor here. As soon as there is a very befitting reply from India, Pakistan has always done it. It has
And do you
got-
think China would get involved in this mess?
Indirectly, sir. Indirectly, because Pakistan got support from the US, from the UK previously in wars. US may deny it today. This time its biggest ally is China. China will obviously not go into it very overtly and explicitly. But the Pakistani arrogance which is still coming out, and when they are saying that we are also retaliating, is because of the Chinese support. And China has a lot of money stuck in Pakistan. And they're not going to let CPEC or the whole plan of what is called as debt capitalism or debt neo-imperialism which is happening. So China will enter it through a different way.
But the situation
Shyam
is
says-
completely different.
Yeah.
Unlike, let's say, earlier situation where China did not have, let's say, did not try to engage with India earlier. There were hostile situations between both
We are
of the
trusting
countries.
China, sir.
Today, the situation is completely different, and all of that thanks to Mr. Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Because of the policies of the USA administration, China is basically trying to have cordial relations, culturally, trade-wise, etc., with not only just with India but other Asian countries also. So, unlike earlier situation, I don't think so. China either covertly or overtly will directly engage with Pakistan and go against India.
There is North
I have one
Korea-
point to make regarding the economic sanctions and the crippling. While that might seem to be a very motivating push to make Pakistan do what maybe the global community wants, but we are again forgetting the nature of the Pakistani deep state. Ideal wisdom tells us that whenever a nation is in economic crisis, the first thing which is cut down is the defense budget. In Pakistan, what is done? When the nation goes in crisis, the increase is in defense budget. So, and it is like, as you had Stephen Cohen famously said, that the Pakistani deep state is like a patient who is addicted to drip morphine. So, as much as the condition worsens, the requirement of morphine keeps on increasing. So, that is the same case with the Pakistani deep state. Drain it out of all its wealth. Already it is behaving like a vassal state of China. So, it will continue to depend on China regardless of what is happening in the population. Presently, what do you think is the condition of the people living in Balochistan? Is it very good? No. What is the condition of people living in Sindh? Absolutely abysmal. Even Punjab for that matter. The floods which occurred in Pakistan 3 years ago, that destroyed 1/3 of their agriculture. Ideal, normal logic tells you what? More money should be given to agriculture and rehabilitation. Where was the money granted? Defense. So even if this country has got 10 rupees, it will spend 10 rupees on defense. So it will not cripple the deep state. That is where we have to continue a policy of a kinetic warfare. There are various different conflicts, right? Various conflicts which are going on across the world. This will be another conflict which will be added to the playbook. But we have to understand, as a nation, we have been called upon into action. This is not something that we initiated. But once called into action, we do not have to walk into a kind of a trap or an expected pathway that they expect out of us. And when I say expected pathway, they would be expecting a major incursion or a major attack maybe in 24, 36 hours. Now, there is also a kind of a very unique philosophy regarding this. Let's keep them on a knife edge for as long as possible. When I say knife edge, let them expect an imminent attack for some time, right? That is when the fatigue factor sets in. And I am sure the forces are recalibrating that, because if you think about, in a very logical sense, when we had a border standoff with China, in the Ladakh sector. Our troops have been deployed there for more than 2 years now, even more than that. Now that has imposed a cost on us in terms of the military logistics, in terms of the economy, in terms of lack of normalization, tourists not going into that region. That is a huge drain on resources. That is something which Pakistan needs to be kept on its foot perpetually now. It is not that we are going to declare ceasefire. We can attack you anytime because you don't give us warning. It is not a kind of a civilized playbook that we are operating upon. We will attack you and we can attack you, and we have to demonstrate that. We have basically the supersonic missile in the form of BrahMos, which is one of the most lethal out there in the world. Make use of that.
Wasn't Operation Parakaram exactly this, but it didn't achieve its objective?
In the case of Operation Parakram, the thing was that the time it took for the military forces to be deployed on the forefront, that was almost a span of 2 months. Now those 2 months, you did not have enough power at the frontier, and you could see that India is gathering the forces. That gave enough time.
But you kept Pakistan on what you call knife edge.
It was not initially at the knife edge. It was expecting that Indian forces are coming. Now you see, when you have a division moving all the way from Meerut or Mathura to the front line, you know that is an attack corps which is coming in. So unless and until that attack corps reaches the frontier, you cannot go for an all-scale war. So there was a kind of a preemptive action taken from the Pakistani side as well. Now, since that point of time, we have revisited that doctrine. We have come up with the cold start doctrine. We have shut out the cold start doctrine as well. Now we have come across with the concept of a dynamic warfare, that we can open up multiple fronts and close the fronts almost immediately, causing multiple damage to you, and at the same time reducing and minimizing the losses.
But
So
okay,
let's-
sir, what
let's
you're saying
remember-
is that do the theater of war, but don't go to war. That is what you're trying to say.
Abhishek sir, let me tell you.
So this was true before Pahalgam also,
No,
right?
no, let me tell you why a full-fledged war is not a viable option. You have to keep in mind the international legal dimension of this as well. A full frontal war would mean territorial incursions, which may not be justifiable under the principles of the UN Charter. Then it would be seen in the same light as Russia invaded Ukraine. Right now we have the advantage. We have been the victim of this terror attack. Acting in self-defense is different, but making a move on the territory of another country is completely different.
POK is
So
not
you will
Pakistan.
end up losing the sympathy of the global
But
community.
sir, POK is not Pakistan.
Absolutely,
that is India.
yes, correct.
I'm
But
taking
that's
what
not
is
how
mine.
the global community looks at it.
No, that I'm taking what is mine. End of story. I moved to international border. After that, sir, there are going to be consequences for our actions.
Also look at the
There's a lot of
economic-
calculations you can do. I'll be very honest with you. There are a lot of calculations. I understand the US. I understand the economic sanctions. I'm not taking something what is not mine. I'm taking POK, and then I'm saying now you tell me.
Chetan sir, in a conflict, in a war, you should also not underestimate the enemy. Can you take us through the possible advantages that Pakistan may have over India, maybe in terms of submarines, or they're very good at information warfare? Tell us about it.
If you do a military to military comparison, Pakistan does have a higher strength in terms of the number of battle tanks. If you look at some of their ballistic missiles, they are quite advanced. And if you look at the fighter jets, the F-16, the latest Block 52 variants, which come with the latest avionic suits, they are quite capable of inflicting severe damage. That is something you can't underestimate. They have a formidable air defense as well. They do have a formidable naval fleet. So any military response, that's what we need to gauge the enemy's capabilities as well, and keep that as part of our war gaming plans. And also if you look at Pakistan, it has been a master of psychological warfare, or what we call as psy-war, and that includes information warfare. How you manage the information flow, how you change the narrative, build a narrative in favor of you and undermine your enemy. And Pakistan has done this quite effectively from a long time.
How?
If you look at, let's say, Western media, look at how they report on these incidents, calling terrorists as just gunmen, or even using terms like militants, which doesn't exactly describe them as terrorists. So this in a way undermines our efforts as well. And India also has been countering the information
How
warfare.
did this happen? How did Pakistan gain this advantage over us?
I think this goes all the way back to the Cold War period, the post-Second World War period, where Pakistan aligned with the Western Bloc. It joined CENTO, aligned with UK, built military alliances with the US. And these Western powers always viewed India with suspicion, given our non-aligned approach and given our slight closeness with the Soviet Union. And they've always seen Pakistan as an ally.
And what would it take to change this narrative?
I think India has been doing pretty well in the last few decades at least. We have been able to counter the information warfare with our own narrative. For example, after 26/11 attacks, India went on a diplomatic offensive. We used the evidence that we had built showing Pakistani state involvement, sharing this with global capitals around the world. We have done the same recently as well after the Pahalgam attack. All the envoys have been called, briefed on the incident. We have shared technical intelligence with them to show that 2 of the attackers were in Pakistan before the attack. So I think this outreach by India to global governments around the world and in general the narrative we have built at platforms like UN, that has definitely helped, point fingers at Pakistan.
United States was backing Pakistan because US needed Pakistan in Afghanistan. Now US is out of Afghanistan and US needs India in the Pacific Ocean region to counter the rising influence of China. So in this case, will US be on our side, or will United States play another important role in de-escalation of matters between India and Pakistan? What would be the role of Russia, considering that it is also under the trap of debt given by China, and China and Pakistan, they are all-weather friends?
Right. I think the role of the US has played a significant role in the timing of this attack. Pakistan and its military establishment are not happy with the Trump administration. Why? Because Trump believes in making America great again. He doesn't care about other countries. He doesn't care what happens.
It's transactional.
Transactional, purely transactional. He doesn't care what happens in Afghanistan. He doesn't care what happens between India and Pakistan. He has made that very clear, and he has even almost given a free hand to India, manage your neighborhood. We are not getting involved. We are not wasting our resources over there. In fact, Trump's one of the primary presidential campaign agenda was to pull out from the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. So US is no longer as dependent on Pakistan as it was before. Before, they needed Pakistan for logistics to supply their troops in Afghanistan. They needed Pakistan for intelligence support to target Al-Qaeda and Taliban. So that dependency is not there. And Pakistan panics from this. Why? Because without American involvement, without America's constant support, the deep state falls apart. US used to provide billions of dollars in funding, which Trump put an end to. And this is good for India. Trump might be chaos for the world, but as far as India and the Kashmir issue and Pakistan is concerned, Trump's policies works in India's favor. And the US administration has been very clear. They stand with India in this conflict. Of course, if the conflict escalates, they would step in, they would try to keep it below the nuclear threshold. But otherwise, I think they would stand with India.
Shimla Agreement ensured that Kashmir is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan.
Right.
Now, Pakistan is saying, although not directly referring to the Shimla Agreement, but saying that all these bilateral agreements can also be put on a hold if India goes ahead with keeping IWT in abeyance, which would also make Kashmir an international issue once again, or do you not see that possibility?
India has not allowed that to happen. Pakistan has made these attempts multiple times. It has brought this up at Organization of Islamic Cooperation time and again. And India has managed to get enough support to keep this on the side burner. And
with the Iranian support.
With Iranian support, with Saudi support, with UAE, they've abstained from these votes. Previously, they would vote for Pakistan on Kashmir, but they've started abstaining from that. So Pakistan's attempts to internationalize Kashmir has largely failed. These are desperate attempts we are seeing time and again. And Trump, in a way, has always said that Kashmir is something that India-Pakistan should handle. He did propose the idea of him acting as a mediator once, but I don't think.
But his idea was shot down.
Shot down as well, and India has put its foot down that this is a bilateral issue.
He was eyeing the Nobel Peace Prize by doing that. But I would like to draw from something that Chetan sir said, that we have made tremendous progress in terms of information warfare. That is where I feel that we still have to be slightly wary about the Pakistani nefarious action. And we have a lot to learn from what happened during Balakot. If we recall, after the Indian Air Force and the planes and the fighter jets, they crossed the LOC, they entered the Pakistani airspace, they carried out a successful attack, and then they came back. The narrative very quickly, within a couple of days in the international media, shifted to the fact that there are multiple eyewitnesses telling about that how it was basically a bombing done within the trees, there was no damage done, there was poor targeting by the Indians, this is just a gimmick.
No F-16 was shot down.
No F-16 was shot down, and they went out of their way to paint India in a certain manner. To some extent, they did succeed in the Western media. Right. But we also had some of the flaws on our side. We should not forget that there was basically a shooting of our own chopper near Srinagar, which happened in the midst of what is referred to as the fog of war. So these things have happened. And we should, again, not take our adversary very lightly. We are more powerful. But as Sun Tzu said, know your enemy and half the battle is won. When you talk about the submarine warfare, they have the air independent propulsions that we still don't have in a lot of our submarines. So they do have the ability to cripple our naval fleet, and that is something that I'm sure the Navy is trying to counter that. But we have to be careful of that. When we talk about the air surveillance, they have more early warning systems, AWACS as they are referred to. More AWACS can be deployed by Pakistani Air Force at any point of time as compared to what India has the capability to. Yes, we have the S-400 missiles and the air defense systems, but we are talking about an offensive war here. And that is where these are the things that we have to keep in mind. And we should obviously not walk blindfolded into this. But yes, there are a lot of learnings going ahead, and I'm sure that is what the military planners would be keeping in mind.
Sham sir, when you look at this attack, we are coming towards the end of this discussion. And one last point that I want this discussion to focus upon. Has this attack busted the myth, as they call, of normalcy returning to Jammu and Kashmir?
I remember a statement that was given by Mr. Omar Abdullah. He said, when you talk about normalcy, you do not have to look at only tourism and come to a conclusion that normalcy has returned. Tourism basically talks about economic activities. It doesn't represent normalcy. What would be a normalcy mean? In a state such as Jammu and Kashmir, it would mean fear, living without fear, living without any terrorist attacks. So I would simply say this kind of a dastardly attack has definitely busted that particular argument that the state is returning to normalcy. If not, we are far away from normalcy as of now. And immediately after the attack, you could have seen there were multiple reports which stated that the number of tourists coming to the states have dipped. Many lakhs of, let's say,
which is normal after an attack of this
the
magnitude.
orders which were placed, they have been cancelled. Many of the tourist spots have been closed now. This is not available for a common man to visit because the government itself is saying there is certain lacuna in terms of security there, which also indicates that yes, we are very far away from the state returning to the normalcy as of now.
What's your take on this?
I feel that we are slightly far away from normalcy. We should have our hope that normal conditions return, but we also have to understand this is not any other region of the country that we are talking about. We have got one of the largest armies of the world standing there and trying to poke their noses there. So there will be time to time interruptions which will happen. We have to be resilient, but at the same time we should not be lulled into complacency that everything is normal. When you take a look at this region of Pahalgam, this was a clearly well-calibrated attack, understanding that vehicles can't reach the region.
Yeah.
So there has to be a kind of a security apparatus which has to be provided there, and we have to understand that these terrorists who have carried out these attacks, they are still on the run as we talk. So it is the terrain, and till now, yes, I understand that porosity across the border cannot be shut down almost immediately, but we should do everything which is possible to at least cultivate enough amount of human intelligence there that any kind of untoward movement, any kind of such incident is immediately reported and a disproportionate action is taken at that particular region. But yes, has normalcy returned? Absolutely not. And that is where I also feel that we are facing a kind of a conundrum, because you see, when you have a greater amount of troops deployed in any of the place, that in a way basically is not tourist friendly, so to say. Tourists don't like to visit to places with heavy troop deployment. So there had been regular demands from the side of the Trader Association as well that reduce the troop presence. But reducing the troop presence does not mean lower your guard and lower the intelligence input that you need to have. This is clear intelligence failure. So while we lower the troop presence, at the same time we have to ensure that the sharper end of the security, that is intelligence, is kept at its level best.
As they say, terrorists have to win only once and we have to win each time. But I would not agree with this narrative that there is no normalcy in Jammu and Kashmir just because of one attack, no matter how dastardly this attack was. Because let's not forget, after 2019, when constitutional changes were made with respect to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, it was downgraded to that of a union territory. Law and order, police is under the control of the center. We haven't witnessed protests on large scale as we would witness prior to 2019. That has stopped almost completely. I think the local population has made peace with the changing constitutional relationship between India and Jammu and Kashmir. So street protests, as we saw, stopped. What we have seen is that now the shift has been towards the Rajouri, Jammu area, the Poonch area.
South of Pir Panjal.
South of Pir Panjal. So that has been a new shift in this security paradigm. But I don't subscribe to this view that there is no normalcy just because of a terror attack, because you have multiple ways of measuring normalcy, not just in one event. Closing comments from all of us, and then we can wrap up this discussion. And if you have any comments, any suggestions to make, please let us know in the comment section, and do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. One last thought, starting with you, Abhishek sir.
It's the time to act. We've been thinking quite a lot. We have a lot of doctrines. But the action should be befitting.
Chetan sir.
This is a dastardly attack. It deserves a befitting response, no doubt about it. But the war that India would wage has to be a multi-frontal war. Because our aim here is to weaken the deep state, alienate the deep state from the Pakistani civilian population. And an all-out war is not the answer for that. It can be counterproductive. It can boomerang and backfire on India. A better response is a multi-frontal war, which includes the military option, of course, with covert options, cyber warfare, economic, information, diplomatic.
Why haven't we been able to eliminate, let's say, Hafiz Saeed, Masood Azhar, and others?
Well, India doesn't have a policy of assassinations, at least officially. And carrying out targeted killings on foreign soil has its own international implications. We have seen that in the case of the allegations that Canada made and US has made. So that leads to its own set of complications.
Forget about the official stance, but unofficially, these covert operations, that doesn't mean that we haven't carried out these covert operations in the past. We have done that in the past, although we may not accept it officially. But why can't we do it covertly?
But let's not forget someone like Hafiz Saeed or Masood Azhar. These are high-value targets who would be under intense protection by the ISI. So reaching them, getting to know their real-time location, arranging the logistics in itself is a huge task.
Shouldn't that be the ideal response to this? It may cripple the terror infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And let's not forget, these are galvanizers, the mobilizers of terrorists.
Absolutely.
They brainwash the young minds and force them to embrace the jihadist ideology.
Right. That's why when we discussed, I told you covert option has to be on the table. As much as we pursue diplomatic options and the kinetic action, covert option has to be on the table.
So you are saying we have been unable to eliminate these high-profile targets because we don't want to do it?
There have been reports in the last 3 years that almost 20 wanted terrorists have been killed by unknown gunmen. And many people attribute this to Indian intelligence agencies, and I hope it's true. So if we have done that, maybe we can still hit back at groups like Lashkar and Jaish, right at the top leadership level.
So, but it has to be structural change. Eliminating individuals may...
Not just individuals, the leadership.
But when you eliminate the leadership, it will take a lot of time for that group to regroup and then re-galvanize the support. So the best way to do that would be eliminate the leadership. Your final take, Sham sir?
I would argue in favor of military operation plus cripple the whole economy. Cripple the economy through direct attack, or let's say the indirect supply that is happening. Some of the experts may argue that they will get access to Chinese goods if India stops the supply. It's not that easy. As such, already there is a free trade agreement between Pakistan as well as China. Despite that, they are importing the goods indirectly from India, which means we are supplying the goods either of better quality, better costing, etc. So I would argue in favor of military operation, covert operations, as well as crippling the whole economy, which will put a bigger, let's say, the burden on the, let's say, the administration in Pakistan to stop all of these activities.
Fuel social unrest in Pakistan? Let the population rebel against the Pakistani state, the army?
Yes.
Shouldn't that be the long-term solution?
Absolutely. Why not? Because one has to keep one thing very clear.
And I just got reminded, is it time to restart the cultural ties between India and Pakistan? Maybe allow the Pakistani players to participate in IPL, not right now, but maybe the long-term strategy to win the hearts and minds of the local Pakistani population, further alienating the Pakistani state?
I don't believe so. I'm not in favor of that, because there might come a time somewhere in the future where there is a situation on the ground.
Or we can say when this did not affect any change in the past, because we have had cultural ties
Absolutely.
between India and Pakistan. Pakistani players would participate in
Yes.
IPL. There were bilateral cricket matches. When things didn't change then, it's not going to change
It's not
any
changed.
further.
There have been endless cricket diplomacies. And we have to understand that we have gone out of our way to welcome the artists of Pakistan. They have been given a kind of a state level protocol. And we have to keep in mind, as Javed Akhtar basically talks about the fact that we were never accorded the same kind of a respect in Pakistan. Our artists were never accorded the same kind of respect. We should not forget, 22nd of April is not just another terrorist attack. It is a challenge to a nation which aims and dreams to be a superpower. The reply should not be that of a soft ideological nation. The reply has to be that of a hard nation state. That if you dare raise your eyes against us, the implications can be devastating and that can bring Armageddon. So that is where Pakistan has to be taught a lesson. Come what may, cultural ties, the time will come. Ideally, we want a world without borders. Ideally, we want everyone to prosper. But this is not the time to ponder about these things. This is a time to think about what should be the ideological response, what should be the tactical response, and what should be the counter response, or what would be there, and accordingly prepare ourselves for that.
I think this is the best conclusion that we can have to this discussion. And if you watched this and got benefited from this, thank you so much for doing that. And do let us know in the comment section. Jai Hind. For the first time ever in the history of Unacademy, Unacademy Plus subscription for 12 months is available at 17,999. I'm told this subscription fee is valid till the 30th of April 2025. If you wish to prepare with us for CSE 2026 or beyond, the link is provided in the video description. Subscribe now and together, let's crack it.